To truly grasp the significance of Waterloo, we must first delve into the extraordinary life and career of Napoleon Bonaparte. His journey from obscurity to the heights of power is one of history's most remarkable stories, filled with ambition, brilliance, and ultimately, tragedy. Born on the rugged island of Corsica, Napoleon came from modest beginnings. His family was of minor nobility, but far from wealthy or influential. As a young man, he attended military school in mainland France, where his sharp mind and relentless determination quickly set him apart from his peers. Rising through the ranks during the chaos of the French Revolution, Napoleon's tactical genius and bold leadership on the battlefield earned him rapid promotions. He became a national hero, celebrated for his victories in Italy and Egypt, and soon he seized power in a coup, crowning himself Emperor of the French. As emperor, Napoleon transformed France and much of Europe. He introduced sweeping reforms, modernized laws with the Napoleonic Code, and inspired both admiration and fear. His armies marched across the continent, toppling old monarchies and redrawing borders, but with every victory his ambitions grew. Napoleon's quest for dominance brought him into direct conflict with the great powers of Europe, especially Britain, who saw him as a threat to the balance of power. In 1812, Napoleon made his most fateful decision: to invade Russia. The campaign began with high hopes, but ended in disaster. The brutal Russian winter, scorched earth tactics, and fierce resistance decimated his once invincible Grande Armée, leaving only a fraction to return home. Sensing his vulnerability, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria formed a powerful coalition. At the Battle of Leipzig, also known as the Battle of Nations, Napoleon suffered a crushing defeat, marking the beginning of the end for his empire. By 1814, the coalition armies marched into Paris. The city fell, and with it Napoleon's dreams of a lasting dynasty. He was forced to abdicate the throne, ending his reign as emperor. The victorious allies exiled Napoleon to the small Mediterranean island of Elba. Though allowed to retain his imperial title, his new kingdom was a mere shadow of his former glory, a tiny island for a man who once ruled most of Europe. In France, the Bourbon monarchy was restored under Louis XVI. Across Europe, leaders and citizens alike breathed a collective sigh of relief, believing that the age of revolution and war had finally come to an end. At the Congress of Vienna, diplomats redrew the map of Europe, determined to prevent another upheaval. They were confident that the Napoleonic era was over and peace would return to the continent. Yet beneath the surface, Europe remained fragile. The wounds of war had not fully healed, and the man who had once shaken the world was not ready to fade quietly into history. As tensions simmered, the stage was set for one final dramatic act, a return that would once again plunge Europe into chaos and decide the fate of an era. Napoleon's story was far from over. The world would soon witness his most daring gamble yet. While Europe's leaders met in Vienna, Napoleon grew restless on Elba. News from France revealed deep dissatisfaction with the restored monarchy. Many soldiers and citizens longed for the glory days of Napoleon. The army, still loyal to their emperor, resented the new regime's dismissals and disbandments. Sensing opportunity, Napoleon escaped Elba on February 26, 1815, landing in southern France with 1,000 loyal guards. As he marched north, soldiers sent to arrest him joined his cause, and crowds cheered his return. King Louis XIV fled Paris, and Napoleon reclaimed the throne without bloodshed. The 100 Days had begun. Europe was stunned and terrified. The great powers would not allow his return to stand. War was inevitable. Napoleon's return sent shockwaves through Europe. The leaders at Vienna immediately declared him an outlaw and formed the Seventh Coalition. Massive armies began to assemble, but only the British under Wellington and the Prussians under Blücher were close enough to act quickly. Wellington's multinational army was inexperienced, but he was a master of defense. Blücher, the fiery Prussian, was determined to avenge past defeats. Their cooperation would be crucial. Together, their armies numbered over 200,000 men. They stood between Napoleon and his ambitions. The race to stop him had begun. The fate of Europe hung in the balance. Napoleon knew he was outnumbered and had to strike fast. His plan: drive a wedge between Wellington and Blücher, defeat each separately before they could unite. He assembled 125,000 veterans and over 350 cannons, organizing them into wings under Ney and Grouchy, with himself commanding the reserve. On June 15, 1815, he launched a surprise attack into Belgium, aiming for the crucial crossroads at Charleroi. If he could split the Allies, he might win before the full coalition arrived. It was a bold, high-risk gamble. Speed and surprise were his only hope. The campaign for Waterloo had begun. Napoleon's sudden advance caught the Allies off guard. On June 16, two battles erupted, Ligny against the Prussians and Quatre Bras against Wellington's forces. Napoleon personally led the attack at Ligny, battering Blücher's army in brutal fighting. Meanwhile, Ney failed to seize Quatre Bras, allowing Wellington to hold the vital crossroads. Napoleon won at Ligny, forcing the Prussians to retreat, but failed to destroy them. Crucially, the Prussians retreated north, not east, keeping the chance to rejoin Wellington alive. The Allied armies were battered, but not broken. Napoleon's victory was incomplete. The decisive battle was yet to come. The fate of Europe would be decided at Waterloo. With the Prussians retreating, Wellington's position was exposed. Blücher promised to support him if he stood and fought. Wellington chose to trust his ally and withdrew to a strong defensive ridge near Waterloo. A massive thunderstorm turned the roads to mud, slowing the French pursuit. Napoleon, believing the Prussians were beaten, sent Grouchy with a third of his army to chase them. But Grouchy followed the wrong Prussian corps, while Blücher's main force marched to join Wellington. Napoleon had split his army at the worst possible moment. The stage was set for a final decisive clash. All eyes turned to Waterloo. June 18, 1815. Waterloo dawned gray and muddy. The fields, soaked by heavy rain the night before, were thick with mud, making movement difficult for men, horses, and artillery alike. The air was heavy with anticipation, as two of Europe's greatest commanders prepared for a confrontation that would decide the fate of a continent. Napoleon, ever the master strategist, delayed his attack, hoping the ground would dry and allow his cannons and cavalry to move more freely. But this hesitation gave the Prussian army, under Marshal Blücher, precious time to close in. Every hour counted, and the tension in the French camp was palpable as officers and soldiers waited for the order to advance. Across the muddy fields, the Duke of Wellington's Anglo-Allied army held a strong defensive position atop a low ridge. Their line was anchored by three key strongpoints: the fortified farmhouses of Hougoumont, La Haye-Sainte, and Papelotte. These outposts would become the scenes of desperate fighting throughout the day as Wellington's men braced themselves for the coming storm. The battle erupted with a fierce French assault on Hougoumont. Thousands of French soldiers surged forward, determined to break the Allied right. The defenders, a mix of British guards and their allies, fought tenaciously, holding the gates against wave after wave of attackers. The struggle for Hougoumont would rage for hours, drawing in more and more French troops. Meanwhile, Marshal Ney led a massive infantry attack against Wellington's center. French columns advanced bravely, but the British line unleashed devastating volleys of musket fire. At the critical moment, British cavalry thundered into the fray, scattering the French ranks and forcing them to fall back in disorder. The fields were littered with casualties, and the air was thick with smoke and the roar of battle. By late afternoon, the French finally managed to capture La Haye-Sainte, a key position in the center of the Allied line. This breakthrough threatened to split Wellington's army in two, and for a moment it seemed as if Napoleon might achieve victory after all. The Allied line wavered under the relentless French pressure. Exhausted, battered, and running low on ammunition, Wellington's troops clung desperately to their positions. The outcome of the battle hung by a thread, and both sides knew that the next few hours would be decisive. Then, on the eastern horizon, dark blue uniforms appeared. Blücher's Prussian army was arriving at last. Their march had been grueling, but their determination was unbroken. The sight of fresh Prussian troops gave new hope to the Allies and struck fear into the hearts of the French. Now the French found themselves caught between two enemy armies. Napoleon's forces were being squeezed from both sides, their lines buckling under the combined assault. The once confident French army was now fighting for survival, surrounded and outnumbered. For a brief, tense moment, the outcome of the battle hung in the balance. Commanders on both sides watched anxiously, knowing that a single charge or a sudden collapse could decide the fate of Europe. As dusk settled over the blood-soaked fields of Waterloo, the final act of this epic struggle was about to begin. The fate of empires rested on the courage of exhausted men, and the world held its breath. The Prussians' arrival forced Napoleon to divert troops, weakening his main attack. Desperate, he sent in his elite Imperial Guard for a final assault on Wellington's center. The Guard advanced into a storm of musket fire and, for the first time, faltered and retreated. The cry, "La Garde recule," spread panic through the French ranks. Wellington ordered a general advance as Blucher's Prussians broke through on the right. The French army collapsed in chaos. Only a few of the Old Guard held their ground, buying time for Napoleon to escape. The battle was over. Napoleon's empire was finished. Europe had changed forever. The fields of Waterloo were littered with the dead and dying. The thunder of cannons had faded, leaving only the cries of the wounded and the silence of those who would never return home. The scale of the devastation was immense, a grim testament to the ferocity of the final battle that would decide the fate of a continent. Wellington and Blucher met in victory as the Prussians pursued the fleeing French. Their alliance, forged in the fires of war, had finally brought down Napoleon's seemingly invincible army. The cooperation between British and Prussian forces was crucial, marking a rare moment of unity among Europe's great powers. Napoleon fled to Paris, but support had vanished. The city that once cheered his triumphs now turned its back, exhausted by years of war and loss. His former allies deserted him, and the people's faith in his leadership had evaporated. Forced to abdicate again, he surrendered to the British and was exiled to remote St. Helena. Far from the world he once ruled, Napoleon would spend his final years in isolation, reflecting on the empire he had built and lost. His dreams of glory were replaced by the reality of defeat and exile. The Battle of Waterloo ended over 2 decades of war and reshaped Europe. The continent, scarred by conflict, now faced the daunting task of rebuilding. Borders were redrawn, and the political landscape was forever altered. The echoes of Waterloo would be felt in every European capital. The old monarchies were restored, and a new balance of power was established. At the Congress of Vienna, diplomats and rulers gathered to negotiate peace and stability. Their decisions would shape the future of Europe, aiming to prevent another figure like Napoleon from rising. Britain emerged as the world's leading power. Its navy dominated the seas, and its influence stretched across continents. The victory at Waterloo cemented Britain's status, ushering in an era of relative peace and prosperity known as the Pax Britannica. For France, it was the end of an era, and the start of a long road to stability. The nation was left to pick up the pieces, mourning its losses and searching for a new identity. The scars of war ran deep, but hope for renewal slowly began to take root. Waterloo became a symbol of final defeat, and a turning point for modern Europe. Monuments were raised, and stories of heroism and tragedy were told for generations. The battle's legacy would inspire both caution and ambition in the leaders who followed. The age of Napoleon was over, but its legacy would echo for generations. The world had changed forever, and the lessons of Waterloo would shape the destinies of nations for years to come.